not cry when my father died, because in the last 3 years before his death, my Fatarad spent his time staring at the attic of the house, whispering to someone who did not exist, as if there was something there far more real than us. The funeral took place under the town's damp and gray sky. As I carried the coffin, I felt that my father Isawait was more than that of a human being. It was as if inside the coffin there was not only a corpse, but a secret and wagging tones, a massive block of stone. I noticed the strange crowd standing at the edge of the cemetery, people who all looked alike, dot with pale faces and necks slightly tilted to the right. None of them were crying. They were just watching. After the funeral, when I returned to that sinister mansion according to the will, I understood that the silence inside the house was not normal. This silence resembled the tense waiting just before a scream. There was a foreign smell in the house, not a stale perfume, but rather the dust of a library that had been closed for a long time, mixed with the smell of dried sweat and metal. On the first night, while looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, I saw a small black spot inside my right pupil. I thought something had gotten into my eye and rubbed it, but it did not go away. When I looked more closely, I realized that the spot was not inside my eye, but the reflection of an old nail hanging on the wall behind me. However, there was no nail on the wall. There was only a empty, lime-painted whiteness. The next day, I noticed the delay inside the house when I dragged a chair in the living room. The sound came exactly 2 seconds after I finished the move. The sound of metal scraping against wood echoed through the empty house and continued somewhere inside my mind. It was as if the house was recording my movements and replaying them to me a little later. When I stood at the top of the stairs and called out, "Who's there?" 2 seconds later I heard my own voice coming from that deep darkness beneath the stairs, with my voice but in a tone that did not have my rhythm. As the days passed, the psychological pressure turned into a physical weight. I found 3 olive pits on the kitchen table. I had not eaten olives. There were no olives in the house. The pits were fresh and wet. Someone had sat in my kitchen and eaten olives. While I was sleeping, or worse, while I was sleeping, I had become someone else. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw that the spot in my pupil had grown a little more, beginning to cover my entire iris. I was now seeing the world only through that dark hole. My mother had been moving around like a shadow since my father's death, but when I saw her in the kitchen that morning, everything changed. She was cutting the air with a large knife, rhythmically, tap, tap, tap. When I went up to her and touched her, I realized that her body temperature was far too low to belong to a human being. When she turned toward me, I saw that her lips had been sewn shut with a black thread professionally stitched. She was trying to speak from behind her stitched lips, producing only a muffled whisper. "The master is hungry. I am preparing the meat." At that moment, a silhouette appeared. At the end of the corridor, a tall being with limbs longer than normal. Its neck was tilted to the side at a perfect 90-degree angle, and I heard the sound of bones rubbing against each other. Crack. This was my great-aunt Helena, the woman who hanged herself in the 1920s. I tried to run, but my feet were glued to the ground. I was losing control of my body. I saw my own hands rise into the air against my will and begin to perform my father's famous rhythmic tapping. Tick, tick, tick. I thought I had gone mad, but this was the awakening of a genetic code. The walls of the house had now completely transformed into a structure of flesh and bone. When I touched the walls, I could feel their warmth and hear the heartbeat of the house. The house was like a living god, and we were its cells. At midnight, my bedroom door opened by itself, and that familiar smell of burnt meat filled the room. My father was sitting at the foot of my bed, but he had no face. Only that inverted triangle symbol carved where his face should have been. When he reached out and touched my forehead, the spot he touched instantly blistered. "Accept it," my father's voice said, directly inside my brain. "Blood finds its way." When I woke up the next morning, I found dozens of dead birds around my bed, all with their necks broken at the same angle. I wanted to get into my car and escape, but when I turned the key, the only sound coming from the speakers was the growl my mother made from behind her stitched lips. The house was no longer spitting me out. On the contrary, it was pulling me in. At the end of the 7th day, time was no longer linear. The attic door opened by itself. Inside was a horror that strained the limits of human imagination. Thousands of human hairs were hanging from the ceiling that black liquid was glistening on. The floor, and in the center stood a throne made of bone. On the throne, the souls, bodies, and sins of my entire family had merged, transforming into a gigantic mass of flesh. And at the very center of that mass, there was an empty place reserved for me. "Come, Aras," said that mass of flesh, with a voice coming from thousands of throats at once. Double quotes, "Return to your own blood, to your own fate. We are the memory of the darkness." I collapsed to my knees, and that black, dense liquid began to flow from my mouth. The moment the liquid touched the ground, I was bound to that mass of flesh on the floor. My skin wrapped itself around the attic beams. My veins merged with the house's plumbing. I was now the house, and the house was me. My mother came beside me and slowly peeled the skin from my face, like peeling a fruit. He felt no pain. The contact of air with my true form. Beneath the skin, those black, ancient scales soothed me. All the windows of the mansion shattered at the same time, and the outside world was plunged into absolute darkness. The pale-faced people of the town gathered in front of the mansion. They all knelt down, all their necks tilted to the right. None of them were shouting my name, but the name of that ancient entity. Aras no longer existed. There was now only it. My father's grave was emptied that night because he was no longer needed. He had completed his duty. I am now writing these lines with my own blood in my father's notebook filled with that black liquid. If you are reading this text, know that you have also become part of this story. Some stories are not just read, they infect their reader like a virus. Now do not look behind you. Do not question why the shadow in the corner of your room is dark yet, and do not suddenly turn your neck. When you hear that crack sound, it will already be too late, because family is everything, and welcome to our family.